The air was thick with the scent of despair. Apokolips, a world built upon the suffering of its inhabitants, was a smoldering ruin of fire and torment. The massive war factories churned out legions of parademons, while the hellish sky burned under the never-ending gaze of its tyrant, Darkseid, the Lord of Apokolips. Darkseid stood atop his citadel, arms folded behind his back, staring into the abyss of space. His red eyes glowed faintly as his thoughts drifted beyond the confines of his infernal kingdom. He had conquered countless worlds, subjugated gods, and broken the wills of the mighty. Yet something stirred in the shadows of the cosmos, an entity that even the great Darkseid had never encountered before. Darkseid, his ever-loyal servant, approached cautiously, bowing deeply before speaking. "My lord, our forces on the fringes of the known universe have encountered resistance." Darkseid did not turn, but his voice carried the weight of doom. "Resistance is inevitable, Darkseid. But why bring this to me?" Darkseid hesitated. "Because the resistance is not from an army. It is from one being, a force unlike anything we have faced before. My lord, it calls itself Mangog." At the mention of the name, Darkseid's eyes narrowed. Mangog. He finally turned to face his servant. "Speak." Darkseid licked his dry lips, his voice barely concealing the dread coursing through him. It came from the void, from the ashes of a forgotten race. "It is said that this creature is the embodiment of billions, the collective hatred of an entire species, exterminated in an act of cosmic genocide. Every scream, every cry for vengeance, every curse hurled into the void. It all became him. And now, my lord, he is moving towards us." Darkseid processed the information in silence. Hatred was an energy he understood well, for he thrived on suffering and control. But an entity forged entirely from the wrath of billions? That was interesting. And what does this Mangog seek? Darkseid asked, his voice devoid of concern. Darkseid swallowed. "The destruction of all gods." Darkseid smirked. "Then let him come." Far beyond Apokolips, in the remains of a shattered world, Mangog rose. His massive form was a nightmare given flesh, towering, grotesque, with a maw of endless teeth and eyes that burned with pure, undiluted rage. His muscles bulged with the strength of an unfathomable force. His claws carved through the fabric of reality itself. He had destroyed lesser deities before, reducing pantheons to dust, devouring their essence, and fueling his wrath with their fading screams. But now, he had turned his attention to one of the most feared entities in existence, Darkseid. For eons, he had fed upon the anger of his annihilated race, biding his time. The gods who had doomed his people were long dead. Their corpses turned to cosmic dust, but still he thirsted. And Darkseid, the so-called god of tyranny, was the perfect embodiment of what he despised. As Mangog tore through the void, he roared, a sound so terrible that it echoed across light years. Planets trembled, stars flickered, and celestial beings whispered in fear. The last time Mangog had risen, entire galaxies had suffered. Now his path was clear. Apokolips would burn. Before reaching Apokolips, Mangog encountered the first line of Darkseid's empire, the Outer Colonies. Vast worlds, each conquered and ruled by Darkseid's iron grip, now stood in the way of the incoming storm. On the planet Caltrax V, a fortress world where Darkseid's elite warriors trained for battle, the alarms blared. The commander, a fearsome new god known as Graal, stood at the front of his forces, watching the blackness of space warp and crackle with violent energy. Then Mangog arrived. Like a celestial beast, he descended upon Caltrax V, his fist slamming into the planet's surface with enough force to shatter mountains. The very core of the world trembled as Mangog unleashed his fury. The armies of Darkseid were nothing to him. Parademons swarmed, only to be torn apart like insects. Fire pits erupted, but Mangog walked through them unharmed. Graal led his forces in a desperate charge, his energy spear crackling with Omega-infused power. He thrust it into Mangog's chest, only to watch in horror as the beast barely flinched. With a single swipe, Mangog crushed Graal, breaking his body like a twig. Caltrax V fell in less than an hour. Word of the massacre spread like wildfire. The other outer colonies prepared for war, but it was futile. One by one, they fell. Mangog did not stop. He did not bargain. He did not leave survivors. His wrath was absolute. Finally, only one world remained before him, Apokolips. Darkseid's judgment. Back on Apokolips, Darkseid watched the carnage unfold through a holographic projection. His warriors, his machines of war, his subjugated planets, destroyed like fragile toys. Darkseid trembled beside him. "My lord, we must prepare. We must call upon the forces of New Genesis. Darkseid raised a hand, silencing him. His expression did not change. If anything, his smirk widened slightly. "Darkseid, you disappoint me," he said, his voice like rolling thunder. "You think I fear this creature?" Darkseid fell silent, but his eyes betrayed his terror. Darkseid turned his gaze back to the screen, watching Mangog approach. The beast had reached Apokolips' orbit. Soon he would be upon them. Finally, Darkseid spoke again, his voice filled with the weight of inevitability. "I will deal with this, personally." With that, he rose from his throne, his omega beams flickering in his eyes. Apokolips quaked beneath his steps. War had come. But Darkseid did not see an enemy. He saw a challenge, and challenges were meant to be crushed. The surface of Apokolips trembled as Mangog descended like a living meteor, crashing into the molten plains with the force of a dying star. The impact sent shockwaves across the planet, toppling dark towers and cracking the ground beneath the feet of Darkseid's minions. The parademons swarmed like locusts, their shrieks filling the air as they surrounded the massive beast. But Mangog did not even acknowledge them. With a single roar, he unleashed a shockwave of pure hatred, an energy so vile and potent that the very sky cracked under its force. The parademons disintegrated, their bodies reduced to dust in an instant. Fire pits erupted like volcanoes, spewing molten rock high into the air. And then, from the heart of his burning citadel, Darkseid emerged. The Lord of Apokolips walked through the flames unbothered, his towering form exuding absolute authority. His hands were clasped behind his back, his expression cold, impassive. Only his red, glowing eyes betrayed his interest. "You have made quite the mess," Darkseid said, his voice deep and emotionless. "A pity. This world was already perfect in its suffering." Mangog's massive jaw twisted into a snarl. "Darkseid," his voice rumbled like an earthquake, "I have come for you." Darkseid did not stop walking. "So I have heard. You despise the gods, do you not?" He came to a halt, staring up at the monster. "You see me as one of them." Mangog's fists clenched, the cosmic energy of his hatred radiating from his form. "You are a god." His massive body coiled, muscles tightening like a predator about to strike. "And I will crush you." Darkseid exhaled slightly as if bored. "Then do it." Mangog lunged. The force of Mangog's charge shattered the ground, his clawed fist slamming into Darkseid's chest with a force that could level entire planets. The impact sent a ripple of energy across Apokolips, igniting explosions for miles. Darkseid was thrown back, his massive body carving a trench through the obsidian landscape before he came to a stop. But he did not fall. He stood, his expression unchanged, as if Mangog's world-ending blow was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. His armor was cracked, but his power remained undiminished. Mangog charged again, but this time Darkseid reacted. His fist met Mangog's, and the resulting shockwave was so powerful that it momentarily extinguished the flames of Apokolips. The very air burned as the two titans exchanged blows, each punch splitting the sky apart. Darkseid moved with absolute precision, every strike calculated, every movement deliberate. His omega beams erupted from his eyes, weaving through the air in impossible patterns before striking Mangog's torso. The beams cut deep, burning through the monster's flesh. But Mangog did not slow. He roared, grasping Darkseid's head with both hands and slamming him into the ground with enough force to send cracks across the planet's core. The omega beams faltered, and for the first time in eons, Darkseid grunted in pain. Mangog's massive claws wrapped around his throat. "I will break you, tyrant, and when I do, your suffering will feed me for eternity." But Darkseid only smirked. "You assume I can suffer, And then he fought back. Darkseid's body ignited with raw Omega energy, his power manifesting as an unholy force of destruction. His grip tightened, and with a single motion, he tore Mangog's hands away from his throat. Then he struck. A single punch to the beast's gut sent Mangog reeling. Another shattered his jaw. A third drove him into the ground so hard that the planet shook. Darkseid raised his hands, and the very essence of Apokolips answered his command. The molten rivers of the planet surged upward, wrapping around Mangog like chains forged from the core of a dying star. Mangog thrashed, but Darkseid stepped forward, planting a boot on his chest and forcing him deeper into the burning ground. "You are strong," Darkseid admitted. "Stronger than most, but you are nothing compared to me." Mangog roared in defiance, forcing himself up despite the weight of the molten chains. His hatred was endless, his fury unmatched. He struck Darkseid again, sending the new god stumbling back. But it was not enough. Darkseid clenched his fist, and for the first time, he used his full power. The Omega effect surged through his form, and he released a wave of destruction so immense that Apokolips itself nearly tore apart. The energy slammed into Mangog, piercing through him like a celestial spear. Mangog howled as the Omega effect wrapped around his very essence, unraveling him piece by piece. His immense power struggled against it, but Darkseid's will was absolute. "You are the wrath of billions," Darkseid said as Mangog's body began to disintegrate. "But I am inevitability." With a final surge of power, Darkseid unleashed the full might of the Omega Sanction. The energy consumed Mangog, breaking him down to the very hatred that created him. The beast shrieked, his form collapsing in on itself. And then, silence. The battlefield was empty. The raging storm had ceased. The ground beneath Darkseid's feet cooled, as if in submission. Mangog was gone. Darkseid exhaled, turning to face the burning ruins of his world. He was alone now, just as he had always been, just as he always would be. He stepped over the crater that had once held Mangog and walked back toward his throne. Another enemy had risen, another enemy had fallen. Because in the end, Darkseid is